Statement made during this show shall constitute.
Let's go ahead and
taxable
go
legal
live
advice.
on
Our
YouTube
firm is
and
not
Facebook,
affiliated
Adam.
with or endorsed by the
Copy
United
that.
States government or any governmental agency. The information and opinions contained herein provided by third parties have been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed by WG Financial Group. This radio show is a paid placement.
Yeffy is on WVNN.
Why do so many people in the United States of America today, why do so many business leaders in the United States of America, and yes, in the state of Alabama, why do so many government leaders, why do they think it is okay to have to shove down harsh mandates on average people?
The Yeffy Program, weekday mornings 9 to 11 on WVNN.
Across Europe, nations are moving to reimpose tougher measures to stem a new wave of COVID infection spurred by the highly transmissible Omicron variant.
In Europe, Denmark is closing theaters, galleries and museums amid their own record surge of cases. France has shuttered nightclubs for a month. Austria pushing ahead with mandatory vaccinations from next year. And now Italy and other countries are increasingly adopting the use of a health pass or vaccine passport that will restrict indoor dining and other recreational activities for those who are fully vaccinated only.
ABC's Julia McFarlane at the foreign desk. As case numbers have escalated, London's mayor has declared a major incident. They have had more than 65,000 cases in the past 7 days. A federal appeals court in the U.S. has ruled that President Biden's vaccine mandate for larger private employers can take effect. All of the former hostages kidnapped in Haiti have been flown out of the country, all of them said to be doing relatively well. No word on if a ransom was paid. Sherry Preston, ABC News.
WVNN. Depend on it. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
The time has come for America to hear the truth.
We are going to stand with them, and not only are we going to fight for their rights, but we're going to stand up for our rights here in our state, in our homes, and in our community. Because the future of labor's rights in the United States of America is not going to be decided in the courts. It's not going to be decided in Congress. It's not going to be decided on talk radio, and it sure is not going to be decided on Fox News. For the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever.
Hello, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller, and we are broadcasting live online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studios in Huntsville, Alabama. Today, we are talking a little about Elon Musk,
Recording
some of
in
the
progress.
fallout from the tornadoes in Kentucky, updates from the Starbucks Workers United campaign. We are also talking to an infectious disease specialist about COVID and the vaccines, and more on today's program. If you want to be a part of the program today, we've got a phone number. You can call or text 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also leave a voicemail through the week if you're not able to listen to the program live. And if you haven't gotten enough of us by the time we wrap here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, then you can find us online. Anywhere you find anything online. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, everywhere you get your podcasts. We're on YouTube as well. If you consume media online, we are there. Remember that your support and the support of our sponsors helps keep us on the air. If you want to become a sustaining member or make a one-time donation to our December fundraiser, you can go to unionly.io/o/TVLR. to make a donation. That is unionly.io/o/TVLR. If you're a member of a union, you should get your local to sponsor the show. You can reach out to me for more details on that. And last night me and David were on a fundraising stream for Kellogg's workers. Max from the Working People podcast, editor-in-chief of the Real News Network, as well as Mel Buer, host of Morning Riot podcast. They did a 6-hour fundraising live stream for the Kellogg's Workers Strike Fund. Kellogg's workers are still on strike, 1,400 of them, for a fair contract, and they were able to raise $15,000 for their strike fund.
That's awesome.
More than $15,000. I was able to join about 9:45. I was on there for about 30 minutes or so. It was a lot of fun. David was doing the behind-the-scenes kind of producerial work, making sure the Zoom guests' entrances and exits were smooth, stuff like that. He's a tech whiz, definitely. And that's really cool. And you can still donate to the fundraiser if you find the Working People podcast on Twitter, Working Pod. It's at Working Pod. You can still donate to the fundraiser, and if we could get them to 20,000 before they distribute the funds, that would be really cool. But 15,000 is still a big. That is fantastic. That's really great. So I was proud to be able to be a part of that. Be able to listen to testimonies from workers actually on the picket line. That was cool. We saw some video live from the picket lines all across the country last night. Some really cool guests. Marianne Williamson made an appearance, the Orb Queen herself. So that was pretty neat. I believe Sarah Nelson made an appearance. Lots of really cool people came on the line to support these striking workers. And there have been a lot of updates on the Kellogg strike recently. For example, was it the Nebraska governor? The Republican Nebraska governor, I believe it was a Republican governor, I think it was in Nebraska, condemned Kellogg's for threatening to permanently replace the striking workers. A Republican governor. I mean, that is fantastic. We love to see politicians standing up for working people, and I don't care what their, I don't care what's motivating them to do that. As long as they do it, then that's good. So we definitely appreciate that as working people ourselves. Joe Biden did the same thing, President of the United States. He issued a condemnation of the Kellogg's Corporation for threatening to permanently replace BCTGM striking union members last week. So they have gotten a lot of support from high places across the country, and that's really good. We love to see that. And potentially as a result of that, there's been a new tentative agreement recently that was just announced yesterday in the Kellogg's fight. And it's gotten some mixed reception. The workers will be briefed on it over the weekend, and they will vote on Monday. We'll see how that vote goes, and of course, we're going to support their decision either way. I gave a presentation on strikes to the Birmingham DSA a couple of nights ago, and one of the things that I mentioned is that striking, there's a huge cost to striking. Of course, I mean, like, intuitively, people understand this because you go without a paycheck, right? You go without a paycheck. You lose your health insurance from the company. This is a big risk. This is a big risk that workers take to stand up to corporate greed. And so I have seen people on Twitter, some, left-wing online activists, condemn working people for accepting contracts that they felt were not good enough, that they felt as outside observers who are not affected materially at all, directly anyway. They're affected as a class, as members of the working class, because an injury to one is an injury to all, and there are ramifications, of course. When we begin a race to the bottom, it's bad for everybody. But the people most directly affected by contracts are the people that work under them, right? And that's, that makes sense. And I've seen people condemn working people for accepting contracts that they didn't feel like was up to snuff. We don't want to do that here on this program. We want to support workers getting the best deal that they believe they can. And but we also want to encourage them to fight to the extent that they feel they can, to the extent that they feel they can get a better deal. They should. They should take as much risk as they feel comfortable taking. And so we want to support them in that. I will note, just for the record, that More Perfect Union has obtained text messages from executives or emails from executives bragging about the new tentative agreement to end the 10-week strike. The executive said, "We have reached a tentative agreement with the union. We will brief everyone at tomorrow's meeting. In short, overall bucket of money stays the same, just shifts of money from one bucket to another. No gain overall for the workers with 3 more weeks on strike and no income. No ratification bonus, and we are confident that this will pass." So that's not a good sign from the executive. But I will say, though, for playing devil's advocate on behalf of the tentative agreement, Connor Lewis from Strike Wave, you can find him at The House Red on Twitter, said that it might not be a good idea to let the bosses characterize the agreement before workers have ever had a chance to see it. He said that, he's a longtime union staffer. He's been in many, many, many negotiations, and he said that even where a contract is clearly a win for the workers, when the bosses turn around, they will try to spin it as a win for management to the executives and to the corporate board and things like this. So maybe that's that particular executive trying to spin things so that it looks better to his peers.
Right. I think that's a really good point, Jacob, and I'm glad you brought that up. That, I mean, obviously a comment like that from management is worthy of consideration, but like you said, and like Connor pointed out, it very well could be an intentional way to craft the narrative here and to look like he's winning in terms of his board of directors and like you said, his peers in management. So, you can't take that just 100% on its face.
Exactly. But then on the other hand, going back to the other hand, there is a local BCTGM president. I forget his name, but he is being quoted as saying this tentative agreement is a Trojan horse and we should not accept it. So, look, they're going to be briefed on the details of the contract this weekend, and they will be voting on Monday, and we will report to you the results of the tentative agreement on next week's show. We will report that out to you as soon as we have it, and we're going to support them whatever they choose to do.
Right, and I think you've done a good job in laying out that it's easy to critique from the outside looking in. I mean, we're not working at Kellogg's. We don't fall under that contract. So, it's easy for us to have our own opinions, and of course we do. Right. Personally, 5-year contracts I think are a little bit long. Not what I would prefer necessarily, but what you open the show with, though, maybe some of the best takeaways is that you're getting a lot of public support for these striking workers that you probably would not have seen this time last year. Certainly, a few years ago, to get standing politicians from even Republican quarters and to have just random kids on the internet supporting the effort and their own ways of trolling the company with fake applications. I think those are all good things that show the labor movement's resurgence, not just in workplace activity, but in like the public narrative and consciousness. Exactly.
And I mean, it is very cool to see the things that are happen, and see workers taking center stage in their lives collectively. and not allowing the bosses to dictate the terms of their lives. And that's something that unions allow people to do, and that's something that we hope more people consider doing as a result of listening to this program, as a result of seeing workers across the country take charge and take ownership of their lives, because the ownership of their lives, the ownership of their production, ultimately, morally and ethically, and rightfully belongs to them, and it has been stolen from them by bosses, by owners, by people who run our society currently, and it's ours rightfully. It's the people that do the work. The people that make the world run ought to decide how the world is run, and so we support. We are very glad to see people taking charge, taking ownership of their lives. Adam, let's go ahead and get a break queued up. We are going to be right back, and we're going to talk some about the Time Magazine's Person of the Year. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with Jacob Morrison and Adam Keller. We will be right back. Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Ironworkers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Ironworkers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
Work sucks, we know, but you can make it better by organizing with your fellow workers. For more information, call or text the Huntsville Industrial Workers of the World at 256-651-6707.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136, out of Central Alabama. Learn more at IBEW136.org.
The attorneys of Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs are proud to represent working people in Alabama and across the Southeast. They have over 100 years of experience representing injured workers in workers' compensation, personal injury, and disability claims. Let their attorneys help you when you get injured on the job. You can find them at www.mtandj.com or 855-617-9333. Let Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs help you when you get injured on the job. Again, the website is www.mtandj.com or the phone number 855-617-9333. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services from other law firms. North Alabama DSA is looking for folks to work for a better North Alabama. They prioritize mutual aid, municipal activism, and union solidarity. Contact them on social media or dsanorthalabama@gmail for more information. Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. Elon Musk has been chosen as Time Magazine's Person of the Year, inexplicably, it seems to me. Now, to be fair to Time Magazine, if one wanted to do such a thing, the Person of the Year is not designed to be the best person of the year, quote unquote, simply the most influential. And okay, fine, let's make that stipulation. But if you read the profile from Time Magazine, it's really difficult to see it as something other than an endorsement and saying that they're the best person of the year, basically. And so it's certainly strange for him to receive that in a year where probably one of the single most talked about things, for good or for bad, depending on where you're reading it, mostly for bad where you're reading it, has been working people. The Great Resignation, workers' refusal to toil in unsafe, underpaid conditions has been the subject of many an article. There have been a historic number of workers going on strike, historic in modern terms anyways. How many times do we see these types of stuff? How many times do we, just in casual conversation with people, especially who are like brainwashed and have these worms in their brains, basically saying, oh, nobody wants to work anymore because of government checks or whatever. The workers, their decisions seem to be driving the narrative at least much more in the year 2021 than they have in a very, very, very long time. We've seen nurses, take center stage as we go into year 2 of the pandemic. We've seen teachers take center stage as they stand up against unsafe working conditions and repression of their speech and academic freedom. We've seen, service workers, like I said, take center stage against, anybody who's worked a service job knows how terrible it is and say, no, I'm not going to put up with that. Workers are organizing in the fast food sector for the first time, at least being federally recognized and winning union contracts for the first time in a long time, basically ever. We're seeing manufacturing workers for the first time since globalization and deindustrialization stand up and win and strike and win big. John Deere workers got a 20% raise. They're getting a 20% raise after their strike over the course of the contract. They're getting a 10% raise starting off the bat and then 2 5% raises before the end of the contract, as well as an $8,500 bonus for signing the contract and like $5,000 bonuses every year, something like that. Workers are taking center stage in a way that they simply have not in the public imagination in a very long time. And so for an individual business owner to be the quote-unquote person of the year really is absurd. The award itself, person of the year, it really plays into that sort of capitalist kind of great man mythology, that these great men, these business owners, are better than everybody else. That they have better ideas than everybody else, that they are the ones who are going to lead us into a new era, and that there are saviors, that we shouldn't look to anybody to better our lives except the elites, except these special snowflakes at the top of our society.
And there's a cult of personality that grows around some of these figures, and Musk in particular. Yeah, now, you have to wonder how much of that's astroturfed. When you get to the level of an Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, you can afford to have bots and people paid to literally praise you on the internet.
Oh, yeah.
Which we have some evidence that that's what happens here. But, it's true. There is something of a cult of personality around figures like him. And like you said, it's sort of the Gilded Age, 19th century style of revering these quote-unquote captains of industry. Mm-hmm. Don't look towards your neighbors, your community. Don't look towards the potential of the government and state power. We should look towards, these elite saviors. And it's it is very reminiscent of the Gilded Age era. It seems like in so many ways we are reverting back to that. But I think, as you said, 2021, I hope that we look back on 2021 as a time of great transition and sort of the fracturing of this economic system we've had over the last, about 5 decades or so. Because like you said, workers are coming back into the consciousness as a movement, which is something that has been steadily crushed over the past 5 decades in this neoliberal era of pro-markets, anti-union, globalization. And I think, there's some evidence to show that perhaps that time is coming to an end. There's a lot of work to be done. This is just the early stages of such a change. But, yeah, I think, Time Magazine and a lot of the mainstream corporate press is very out of touch with what's happening out in the real world. And this is just another example, frankly.
Oh, yeah. It definitely. The idea that he got where he is because he's some, super special person, as opposed to, look, in the beginning, when he started, no doubt there was a certain amount of work that he did that was probably good. I'm not in that industry, but sure, let's stipulate that he did good work, and even stipulate that he does good work today, and even stipulate that insofar as supervision and administration is a legitimate function of a person, which I think it is. I'm a bit biased because administration is my job. I manage projects, right? I manage multi-million-dollar projects that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay, that's my job, and I think you have to have that. I think that administration of funds, administration of workload, keeping tabs on scope, schedule, and cost. These are all important and legitimate functions, especially when you get into big projects, big organizations, big companies, big government agencies, okay? Sure. But does that mean that he should be the richest person in the world and single-handedly be able to control the way that industries go, as opposed to having the people that are actually doing the work, the engineers that are actually making these innovations, be compensated for that work, or have decision-making authority to decide where the industry goes or decide where funds ought to be allocated? Of course not. Of course not. The people that do the work should have the decisions, and he should have decision-making authority to the extent that he actually does work. But to the extent that he simply owns a company that has become more and more successful by virtue of the work that his employees have done,
well, and
that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense for him to have that authority on that basis.
Right, and of course, it's not just the work that his employees have done. There's a fair amount of stock speculation that comes with his wealth in particular.
A fair amount of stock speculation and government subsidization.
Right. So, but what you're touching on, though, I think is such an important point that is so often ignored, especially in the media, and that's the concentration, not just of wealth, but of the power that comes with that wealth. And as I mentioned earlier, we've seen this trend over the past 5 decades where not just wealth and income has concentrated, but the power that comes with that. And what that means is that in the year 2021, you look around and you have what amounts to a handful of individuals and corporations that control the vast majority of our political economy. They control employment, resource extraction, resource distribution, the production and distribution of goods and services, and the ability to purchase and lobby and sway government officials that comes with that. That is not a democratic society. When you're talking about what amounts to a few hundred people in a country out of 300 million who can single-handedly sway the way in which we live, our material lives every day.
Right.
That is a concentration of power that, we haven't seen in quite some time. We've seen that reversal of the gains we made as a labor movement in the early, the first part of the 20th century. We've seen the gains we made in terms of social services from the state has been steadily eroded to the point now where even among mainstream Democratic Party circles, there's not much belief that state power can be used in a positive way to impact people's material lives.
Yep. We are going to talk some about Alabama legislative pay raises, teacher pay raises, tornadoes and worker safety, and more on the other side of this break. Stay tuned.
This as the TSA screens 2.2 million people on Friday for the holiday rush. Some European countries are taking steps to close their borders as Omicron cases mount. ABC's Julia McFarlane is at the Foreign Desk in London.
We are just 7 days now from Christmas, and Europe is once again seeing a surge in COVID-19. Records are breaking both on the continent and here in the UK, where officials recorded 93,045 new daily cases. That's the highest number of daily new infections since the start of the pandemic.
Several Broadway shows here in New York have gone dark temporarily because of infections. The Rockettes have canceled their entire rest of the season. So far, it's not come to that in the NFL, but the schedule is in flux because of the virus. Here's ABC's Zachary Quiche.
Multiple teams decided to postpone a number of games for the first time this season. Today's game between the Cleveland Browns and Las Vegas Raiders has been moved to Monday, and 2 games slated for Sunday have both been moved to Tuesday. The NFL's rising infection rate also affecting coaches. Sean Payton from the New Orleans Saints, the first known COVID case in the league last year, tested positive again.
A federal appeals court ruling the Biden administration vaccine mandate for large private companies can move forward. President Biden and his family today commemorated the 49th anniversary of the car crash that killed the president's first wife and baby daughter. They attended Mass and visited their graves in Delaware. The 17 missionaries who had been kidnapped in Haiti have been flown back to the U.S. Christian Aid Ministries Director David Troyer.
Everyone, including the 10-month-old baby and the 3-year-old and 6-year-old boys, seem to be doing reasonably well.
You're listening to ABC News.
Are you more than $10,000 in debt? Feel like you're on a never-ending treadmill, staying in one place and never getting ahead with those minimum payments? You feel like there's no way out? Don't let the credit card companies bully you anymore. There are programs in place to help you get free of your debt, and you don't have to pay the entire amount you owe. The program at Total Financial Freedom can help you get debt-free in months instead of decades. Get off the debt treadmill and stop the harassment. Get free of credit card debt, signature loans, department store cards, internet loans, and medical bills. Call now at 800-533-6605 for free information. For about 10 years, Total Financial Freedom has helped thousands. They're A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau, too. Get off the endless cycle without having to declare bankruptcy. You'll have the right to settle your debt for a mere fraction of what you owe. Call Total Financial now at 800-533-6605. That's 800-533-6605.
Tune in for Prayers for Life with Copper, pro-life news talk, every Sunday at 3 p.m. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. We're still hearing the intro music. We can go ahead and cut that. We can go ahead and cut that music. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. We just wrapped up a conversation about Elon Musk being the Time Magazine's Person of the Year. And next, we wanted to talk about Alabama legislators are getting a 4.3% raise to $54,000, while teachers are getting a 2% raise to all the way up to $41,700. Okay? I mean, wow. I will say, just somewhat controversially, I think that legislators should be well compensated. I think that it is reasonable for legislators to be well compensated because, look, I know that it feels good to say, screw politicians, right? They don't deserve anything, and they, I hope they, they can pound sand and take $0 for all I care. And look, that feels good, and for the majority of them, that's like what they're worth, right? Republicans and Democrats, that's about what they're worth, is $0. But if you had a very low salary for elected officials, that would preclude working people from trying to become their own representatives. To the extent that such a thing happens, to the extent that such a thing can happen, having a low salary makes it even more difficult for working people to justify quitting their jobs or putting their careers on hold to run for office. So, we do need to have a decent salary. And so $54,000 to be a state legislator, which once you add per diem and travel, it probably ends up being, reasonably more than that.
But it certainly does. and it's worth pointing out that this is for approximately about 3 months of work out of the year. Of course, there's always the risk of special sessions. And that's not to say that, legislators do not do work outside of the session. They should. They should be meeting with constituents, responding to constituent phone calls and emails, all the things that, you're taught in elementary school your representatives are supposed to do as representatives of the community. But, generally speaking, you're talking about 3 months or less away from home.
Yeah, definitely. So it's, principally I'm not opposed to a $54,000 salary for state legislators. But what I am opposed to is politicians setting their pay above teachers. I am definitely opposed to politicians saying it is okay that I get paid $54,000 a year, plus per diem, plus travel, plus expenses, while educators make $41,700 a year. That is nonsense. That's absolutely nonsense. And I don't pretend to be a mind reader. I don't pretend to know the thoughts and intentions of the governing majority in the Alabama legislature. But if one were to want to destroy public education, if one were to want to stick money in people's pockets that profit off of private education, that profit off of charter schools, off of parochial schools, off of these non-public education things, if I were to want to do that and destroy working Alabamians' ability to get an education as a right as a citizen of this state, that's what I would be doing. That's what I would be doing. If that's what I wanted to do, I would make teacher pay so low that it is almost not worth the degree. You pay as much for a college degree in this country, or more for a college degree in this country, than your salary.
Right. And
that's insane.
And I think it's also worth noting that the starting salary that we're referring to at around $41K, it just now got into the 40s. I believe last school year. So, it was lingering down in the 36, to 39 range for most of the last decade. I know my first year as a classroom teacher, it was around 36. And like you pointed out, Jacob, that's, if you're lucky, you got your degree for that amount of money.
Yeah, if you're lucky. I know a fellow that has $100,000 in student debt from a math degree at UAH.
Yeah. And something that, is not necessarily unique to the teaching field, but is something that maybe not everyone realizes, that to become a teacher, you're going to spend an entire semester before you graduate and walk across that stage with your degree and get your, Alabama teaching certificate. You spend a whole semester as a student teacher or an intern. And, it's kind of interesting in that you are essentially paying the university to do a full-time job.
Right.
So not only do you have all the commitments of a full-time job, you're there 5 days a week, you show up when the teachers do and you leave when the teachers do. And believe me, that is not from 8 to 3.
Right.
And so you are doing the full-time teaching load, full-time responsibility, full-time schedule, while also, coordinating with your supervisor as an intern in the college to make sure you're getting your credit for that. You're working with your coordinating teachers, all while still paying full price tuition for this whole semester.
And all this, teachers making an abysmal salary while now going through year 2 of a pandemic where, contrary to what you will hear on some shows, was not a vacation for teachers. And we can see this basically objectively, because if it was a vacation for teachers, if they had such an easy time of this, then more than half of educators in Alabama would not be considering quitting.
Right.
We would not have historically high resignation rates in our schools. We had 300 staff in Huntsville City Schools alone resign in the last school year. In Huntsville City Schools alone. How can you justify saying that this past year and a half, going on 2 years, has been a vacation when they make when you start off making below the state's median salary for being a college-educated worker with oftentimes tens of thousands of dollars of student debt? And I mean, it's obscene. It's obscene that our educators are being taken advantage of this. And so the way to change that, of course, is for educators to organize and and for their communities to support them where they do so, and for them to have more control of their profession and of their working lives, because their working conditions are our children's learning conditions. And there's an Alabama Education Lab that has been doing a lot of really good work, and Adam's going to be diving into that over the next couple of weeks, and maybe he can give us some good in-depth analysis on that from the perspective of somebody who worked in the teachers union and who was a rank-and-file educator. But one of the key takeaways that the Alabama Education Lab came away from looking at quote-unquote high-flyer schools, which are schools in high-poverty areas which had above the national average proficiency rates in math and science and reading and such, was that here's a crazy thing. Teachers take control. Teachers have control of their classrooms, and they're supported in the things that they need. That's not happening in so many schools across our state right now. Teachers are being disrespected, not well compensated, being told that they're on vacation, being told that that they're indoctrinating children, and that they don't care about their students. Which why would you go into education if you don't care about the next generation? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and you mentioned those last two things. I want to tease out a little bit because, for one thing, the indoctrination and this sort of manufactured hysteria over critical race theory and other curriculum issues. That's not entirely new. I mean, we've had textbook wars for decades, whether it's about teaching evolution in the classroom, or teaching, any sort of diversity. So that's not new, but it has been reinvented and kind of reinvigorated. And yes, some of that is in response to the Black Lives Matter movement and in response to, I think, folks clinging to old ideology, seeing it start to fracture, especially among young people who aren't quite as bigoted as they should be, in their eyes, quite frankly. So some of that is in response to changing conditions culturally. Some of it is yet another way, I think, like Trojan horse, that phrase was used earlier about a contract, and I think that is a Trojan horse.
Right.
This is a way to stir up angst and rage among far-right elements. It's a way to confuse and scare parents. But what is ultimately going to be behind this is, yet again, the drive to privatize and the drive to put public tax dollars designated for the public education system into private hands, private pockets.
Exactly.
Ultimately, that's what it all traces back to. And that's not to say that some of these people, don't believe in this. Of course they do. There are folks out there who are just, dead set against your children learning that there are people who don't look like them, or that perhaps, just maybe, the United States of America was not always the good guy for the past 400 years in our history from colonial times onward. So yes, there is legitimate ideology there, but it's always, always connected to interests who are looking to put the public dollars in their private pockets. And, teachers absolutely care about their students, and not just teachers, all educators, that includes your bus drivers, your cafeteria workers. Right. I heard a very moving interview with some bus drivers in Kentucky this week. And they were going around checking on those families and those kids that they know, they've built relationships with, and checking to see which ones were still alive after these devastating storms. And those are the type of burdens that our education workers take on and take in their hearts and souls, and they feel it. And there's a reason why there's a mental health crisis among education staff, because it's not a job that you simply can clock out and disappear from your mind and you not think about it. You lay awake at night in bed thinking about those kids and the hardships they're experiencing. You're thinking about the home lives that they have. And oftentimes what's happening outside of school for those kids is way more impacting on their education performance, quote unquote, than anything you're doing inside the school. As hard as you're trying to reach them, to support them, you as a school, you as a teacher, even you as a school district, you can't fix poverty.
Right.
And I think in our state and in our country, we have designated the public school system as sort of the last stopgap measure to just fix all of our social ills. But, Miss Jones, the English teacher, cannot reverse the fact that so many of her students are living in poverty, or that so many of her students are being plagued by not just drug addiction, but by the negative impacts of the war on drugs and the fact that they have parents who are incarcerated in a discriminatory way. And on and obviously I could go on here, but I think it is kind of I'm glad you brought it up in terms of the pay raise disparity between legislators and educators. 2% is certainly not enough, and they deserve so much more. And beyond just salaries, as you mentioned, the working conditions are really a need to. Organizing is going to be the solution because right now in the state of Alabama, as a teacher, you're guaranteed theoretically 30 minutes free of supervision and teaching responsibilities. So all the time that you have to spend planning your lessons, inputting your grades, communicating with parents, going to meeting after meeting, most of them bogus, filling out all sorts of data and paperwork and, responding to dictates from central office and your admin. All this is supposed to happen within a 30-minute window. And, oh, by the way, the law has no teeth, so if your school or administrator arbitrarily violates that and takes up your planning period every day of the damn week, they can get away with it.
Right. Exactly.
So, educators, we have to organize.
Tornadoes barreled through several states last week, as Adam mentioned, causing untold damage. In Kentucky, where the damage was the worst in the state's history, in fact, the death toll at last count was 77. And even given these dire conditions, bosses in Kentucky and across the path of the storm forced their employees to work and held them captive. In Edwardsville, Illinois, 6 workers were killed in the collapse of an Amazon warehouse. Another was injured. The last thing that one of these workers who were killed sent to his girlfriend via text was, quote, "Amazon won't let us leave." Bloomberg News has obtained texts from some of these delivery drivers that worked for contracting companies for Amazon. We've got to talk about fissuring sometime in the workplace and all this subcontracting nonsense where, of course, the boss is Amazon, but it's really some, Joe Blow shipping and logistics, whatever. But Bloomberg News has obtained texts from some delivery drivers showing that they were told if they returned with their packages that it would, quote, "be viewed as refusing your route and you will not have a job tomorrow." The issue isn't just limited to Amazon, though. Mayfield Consumer Products did exactly the same thing to its employees in Kentucky. At least 15 different employees refused to go home, and 8 were killed. At least 15 different employees requested to go home. They were refused that request, and 8 were killed during the tornadoes at work where they were not allowed to leave. They were told that if they left, they would be fired. Now, I was told that the government protected workers from abuses like this, and that's why we don't need unions anymore. That's what I was told. And, technically, workers are protected from refusing unsafe work under the National Labor Relations Act, even as individuals, but we know that this enforcement is mostly non-existent, weak where it exists at all, and always after the fact, after workers have been killed or maimed or fired from refusing unsafe work. This law does not empower workers with the knowledge that they have the right to refuse unsafe work. It does not empower workers with the knowledge that they will be protected if they refuse unsafe work by the government. In fact, most don't know they have that right at all. And the ones that do know that it's BS. The ones that do know that they have a right under federal labor law to refuse unsafe work know that in the course of enforcing the law, if they refuse unsafe work, they will be fired regardless of the law. And that in the course of correcting that mistake, they will go weeks, months, possibly years without a salary from the company that they were unjustly and illegally fired from before the government forces them to be reinstated with back pay, if they get back pay at all. And this throws a worker's life into turmoil. It's totally bogus to believe that workers have any real power to refuse unsafe work under the National Labor Relations Act as an individual worker in an unorganized workplace. It's totally bogus, and these workers abiding by these unlawful orders to remain at work shows exactly that. Workers do not believe that they have a real right to refuse unsafe work. And they know the reality. They know the reality where people who want to demagogue about how unions are scary and collectivist and all of this, these people will obfuscate that reality, and they don't want you to know that. It's crazy, but for people that are in favor of government protection of workers, for people that do think that the government should be workers' saviors, there was an attempt in Illinois to strengthen workers' protection through the legislative process. that strengthening of workers' protections would have come in the form of a just cause protection law, a law that would say for a worker to be fired from the company that they work for, they have to actually be bad at their job. They have to actually be bad at their job. Or, there has to be some financial reason, like there's downsizing or the company is going bankrupt or things like that. You can't just fire somebody for willy-nilly reasons. There has to be a reason. Okay? And that seems reasonable. I think most working people would prefer to work in an environment where they felt comfortable knowing that I will not be fired for any reason or no reason at all. I don't think that's a crazy ask. But that law or that bill was shot down by the very same forces that want you to believe that the government is going to protect you. I mean, it shows the hypocrisy and the nonsensicalness of this. On one side of their mouth, people will say, oh, don't worry about it. The government's going to save you. You don't have to worry about all of this talk about organizing among yourselves and taking action into your own hands and being the master of your own life and all of this crazy, crazy nonsense. You don't have to worry about that because the government will save you. And then on the other side of their mouth, they will say they will fight tooth and nail any initiative to actually empower workers to refuse unsafe work, to have safer working conditions, and they will also fight tooth and nail to renege, to pull back on any protections that we do have, however flimsy they may be. So, of course, the answer is to organize.
Right. And, Jacob, they will also fight tooth and nail to prevent any sort of efforts to decouple your life from employment. And what I mean by that is, as it stands now in our economy, the vast majority of people can only have money through employment. You can only have health care through employment. So you can only have a retirement that's going to, actually provide you some sustenance through employment, right? So you as an individual, because again, that's all, the powers that be want you to see yourself as an individual consumer operating in this marketplace, your destiny is tied up into your fate as an employee. And as you mentioned, so there's a resistance to empowering you as that employee, but there's also the resistance to empowering you as someone who's not an employee, right? Because apparently it's a radical notion that we should just get health care, being the wealthiest country on the history of planet Earth. That's radical to assume that, we might guarantee someone the right to a life. So let's take a case study we've had multiple case studies of workers being forced to work in unsafe conditions, knowing that they don't have any actual real protection from the government in non-union environments. Let's take a case study in a union environment. This is a very good article by a rank-and-file Teamster in Jacobin magazine that was released in May of 2020. The title is "The Day My Coworkers and I Chose Our Survival Over Our Supervisor" by Danny Catch. Danny Catch. You should read it. It's a really good article. But the synopsis of this is that he was a Teamster working for UPS in New York on 9/11. And after the second plane hit, he was only blocks away from the explosion at the World Trade Center. After the second plane hit the towers, his supervisor told him that if he left, he would be fired. that he did not have the authority to leave, that he did not have the authority to run away from a collapsing building. I mean, holy crap. But they knew, because they had a union, that was nonsense, that he couldn't fire them for that. And so all of the employees left while the supervisors stayed there and chose a company that doesn't know his damn name. I mean, can you imagine being more pathetic than that? I mean, holy crap. Staying at a UPS delivery center after 2 planes have hit the World Trade Center
out of loyalty to a company that does not know your damn name, that doesn't care about you at all. So the workers, the Teamsters represented workers who had a union contract, knew they had the power within themselves from their organization to flee an unsafe working environment. And so they did. And they were not fired. And in fact, the manager was disciplined for issuing an unlawful and an order against the collective bargaining agreement. And so, this is that's what happens when you actually have the power to refuse unsafe conditions. That's what happens when you're actually protected on the job, when you know your rights, and when you have a union in your workplace. You know that you're protected from this. So that's something that y'all should read. It's a very good article.
And I also put it in the chat for YouTube and Facebook, and I'm about to put another one there. NBC actually had a pretty decent article that just came out, shedding some light on that candle factory you referred to in Kentucky, including some of the working conditions there, and the fact that this factory seemed to really specialize in hiring like the most vulnerable types of folks to work there. Ex-cons, folks coming from Puerto Rico, really, the most kind of on the edge types of employees you could find who are going to be desperate and just therefore more easily exploited. So definitely check those out when you get a chance.
Yep. So before we go to our guest, we are going to run through our favorite segment every week. Last week in Southern Labor, where we bring you everything that happened in the labor movement in the South of the United States. We get this information from Jonah Furman's newsletter, Who Gets the Bird, where he compiles all of the information from the entirety of the labor movement across the whole United States. So we give you a snippet of it. We give you what happens in the South. If you want to if you want to read about what happened in the rest of the labor movement in the United States, you should subscribe to whogetsthebird.substack.com, written by Jonah Furman. It's very good. Highly recommend it. Could not recommend it enough. It's awesome. I love it. And I love Jonah. Jonah does good stuff. So in legislation, the outgoing Virginia Governor Ralph Northam is proposing a raise for teachers in that state. As we've seen from Louisiana and New Mexico, governors are making year-end budget proposals. The incoming Governor Youngkin campaigned on raising teacher salaries as well. So we'll see if that happens. That would be good, and I would be very happy if Governor Youngkin supported teacher raises. We'll see what happens when he gets in office. In organizing, 35 workers at Nelson's Greenbrier Distillery in Nashville are organizing with UFCW Local 1995, and they are calling on supporters to send a letter to the CEO. Adam is going to get that link and drop it in the chat so that you can send a letter to the CEO supporting their unionization there. 6 welders and pipe fitters at HVAC company Comfort Systems USA in Montgomery, Alabama, are unionizing with United Association Local 52. 6 box office workers at Capital One Hall in Tysons, Virginia, are joining the International Alliance of Theatrical and Stagehand Employees, Local 868. 9 workers at the Seminole Electric Cooperative in Tampa voted 6-2 to join IBEW Local 108. 5 supply room clerks at Fort Bliss, Texas voted unanimously to join Operating Engineers Local 351. 2 security guard unions are fighting over 84 guards at HUD at HUD headquarters in D.C., and it was a big week for public sector unionism in Virginia under the still newish collective bargaining law. Richmond, Virginia teachers and Loudoun County teachers in Virginia now have the legal right to negotiate union contracts, which is very cool. In strikes and bargaining, Steelworkers Local 40, after 2.5 months on strike at Special Metals in Huntington, West Virginia, say that they think they are close to a contract settlement. That's very much a believe it when you see it kind of thing, so give to their strike fund if you can. Unite Here Local 25 is picketing Colonial Williamsburg in Williamsburg, Virginia, over an expired contract. The American Postal Workers Union has a tentative agreement with the U.S. Postal Service, one of the largest union contracts in the country, covering over 200,000 workers. The ratification vote will be held at some point over the next few weeks. We're going to have to get Shelton, who is the local president of the APWU, on to talk about that at some point. And as I mentioned before, Kellogg's and BCTGM have come to a new tentative agreement with mixed reception. The workers will be briefed on it over the weekend and vote on Monday. We'll see how the vote goes, and of course, we will support their decision either way. That is it for our segment Last Week in Southern Labor. Our guest is on the line, Dr. Mark Elaine Dery. We are going to take a break and talk to him about COVID misinformation on the other side of this break. Adam, pull up the break, and we will be right back. Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Iron Workers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Iron Workers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
Work sucks, we know, but you can make it better by organizing with your fellow workers. For more information, call or text the Huntsville Industrial Workers of the World at 256-651-6707.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136, out of Central Alabama. Learn more at IBEW136.org.
The attorneys of Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs are proud to represent working people in Alabama and across the Southeast. They have over 100 years of experience representing injured workers in workers' compensation, personal injury, and disability claims. Let their attorneys help you when you get injured on the job. You can find them at www.mtandj.com or 855-617-9333. Let Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs help you when you get injured on the job. Again, the website is www.mtandj.com or the phone number 855-617-9333. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services from other law firms. North Alabama DSA is looking for folks to work for a better North Alabama. They prioritize mutual aid, municipal activism, and union solidarity. Contact them on social media or dsanorthalabama@gmail for more information. Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. On the line we have Dr. Mark Elaine Dery. He is an infectious disease specialist out of New Orleans, Louisiana, and I wanted to bring him on the line today because Alabama has the I believe it was the second highest COVID mortality rate, the second highest rate of death from COVID in the country. The only, thank God for Mississippi, as the saying goes. They are the only state in the country with a higher rate of death than Alabama from the coronavirus. We also have the third largest share of unvaccinated individuals in the state. So I know that we are on a conservative talk radio station, and we have a lot of listeners who do not trust the vaccine. And I wanted to bring Dr. Dery on to be as unjudgmental and to be as fact-oriented, and just we want to level with everybody and bring you some good information and some good places to do more reading if you're not satisfied with our conversation here on the radio today. I know that lots of our members are skeptical about the vaccine. I know people in my life that are skeptical about the vaccine, that are skeptical about COVID in general somehow still after almost 1 million people dead. So I wanted to talk to Dr. Dery about that, about some of these things. And you know, like I said, I solicited a few questions from my Facebook page, and I have probably the majority of my friends on Facebook. People that I'm connected with are conservative people, are evangelicals, are people that, you know, that do not have the same political opinions as me. Very, very different, very different. So I solicited some questions from them. If you have any questions, or if you have heard any questions from vaccine skeptical people, then drop them in the YouTube or the Facebook chat. This is something that I hope we can clip this interview and you can share it with your members, and it will be helpful to them in you know, going through kind of these discussions about what's real and what's not real. Because to be fair to people on this radio station, I don't think I've ever heard anything about, oh, the vaccine is actually bad, but it's always kind of like, oh yeah, you should get the vaccine, sure, as a throwaway comment before they start attacking you know, Democrats and Dr. Fauci and things like this. It's always a throwaway comment. So I wanted to actually dive into, and I also wanted to kind of level out our coverage as well, because there are union members at ULA who have, I believe, reasonable medical exemptions that they're fighting for, and that their company is attempting to terminate them. There's a fellow with leukemia who has had COVID, who his doctor says he should probably not get the vaccine at this point, and the company is trying to fire him. In a workplace with a 97% vaccination rate, the company is trying to fire him. There's another fellow who's been going through chemotherapy for 6 months. He has cancer. His doctor also said you should probably not get the vaccine at this point, and the company is trying to fire him for that. So, you know, we have been on that. We've covered that story. And we've been sympathetic to the workers and antagonistic towards the boss. And so we don't want people to get the impression that we are anti-vaccine or that we're skeptical about the vaccine. We're very much pro-vaccine. We're very much pro-getting vaccinated and all of this thing. And so anyway, Dr. Dery, I very much appreciate you taking the time on this Saturday morning to talk to us about this. I think it's very important.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the first thing, I guess, can you talk to us, just generally speaking? I've got a couple more specific questions, but generally speaking, if you come to a vaccine skeptical individual, somebody that thinks that, you know, this is that it's bad, they shouldn't get it, it's going to hurt them, or it's going to be worse than COVID, what are like the first things, the first arguments that you say to these people to try to encourage them to get vaccinated?
So first, let me just be very clear that I have stopped doing that. I don't care anymore. I don't care anymore. It has been a year. There have been millions and millions and millions and millions of doses. Billions of people across this planet have been vaccinated. And if after a year, the first dose went in on December 19th. What's today's date? Today's date is December 18th. So it almost exactly 1 year ago today. And so, right, quite frankly, to be perfectly honest, I have stopped. I can't, I'm an infectious diseases doctor and epidemiologist. I have a very, very, very busy life and schedule, and I can't anymore individually, one by one, try to undo whatever misinformation that exists inside people's heads. So that's where I'm at right now. But let me answer your question. To be very clear, I try to approach it, or I used to, or if somebody does engage me, which again, I have stopped because, the conversations I had 9 months ago or 6 months ago are very different from the conversations I have now. Because 9 months ago or 6 months ago, people were still looking to possibly get vaccinated. We're at a point now with Omicron. This is probably 70 times more infectious than Delta. Delta was 120 times more infectious than Alpha, and Alpha was 50 times more infectious than the strain that emerged out of Wuhan. So we're not playing anymore. And the people who are getting sick from Omicron are those people who are either unvaccinated or those that are vaccinated but not yet boosted. So we're at a point now where we're at, I'm talking to people about getting booster doses, right? So when do you get booster doses? You get booster doses after 6 months after your second mRNA vaccine. So we're talking about 7 months out. And Omicron, wait for the tidal wave that is going to be Omicron. Omicron is going to, especially with Christmas and New Year's and the holidays, come mid-February, we are going to see a tsunami of cases moving forward. So what do I tell people? Billions of people have been vaccinated. This is incredibly safe. And very likely the studies are very, very clear that people who are the people who are not vaccinated are a predictor of those individuals who are unvaccinated is likely who they voted for in the recent election in 2020. Was it 2020? I can't remember. Was it? Yeah, it was 2020. So if you voted for Trump and if you live in a county that voted for Trump, you have 5 times the likelihood of mortality. So you are 5 times more likely to die of coronavirus than if you live in a county that didn't vote for Trump. So this has clearly become politicized, and there's no reason for it to become politicized except for we are in a very, very, very dangerous time in our country's history, and we are deeply, deeply divided. And to be perfectly honest, the science is out there. Like you said, there's a throwaway line and then attack Democrats and attack Dr. Fauci. So I don't know what else to say. I'm done. I've spoke for 1 year. I've created cartoons. I have my own radio program. I am on TV. I got all 3 of my vaccinations live on television on the morning local morning news here in New Orleans. I have nothing left to say because I don't know what else there is to say. So there you go. That's the answer to your question.
Well, I got to say, Jacob, before you continue, that I appreciate you just being honest and keeping it real with us, because I can only imagine the frustration you feel as someone who is an expert in this area. Jacob and I are not. And it's frustrating enough just on our end to have these conversations. So, appreciate you keeping it real. And not to digress it too much, but I just got to say, it is an interesting strategy to appear like you are killing off your own voting base.
It's incredibly what this shows, and it's a great point, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I used to argue all the time, in medicine we put profits before people, and everybody used to get angry with me, and they'd be like, oh, don't politicize, or don't do this, don't do that. But what this has shown, and what we've known now, because if you look at climate change, we haven't done anything for climate change. And if you look at gun violence, we haven't done anything about gun violence. And you look very, very closely what happened with the coronavirus pandemic. We haven't done anything. We have responded the worst. This country has responded the worst. Public health science is pretty simple. It's very, very straightforward. And what we have shown is that our culture does not care for people. We do not care for people. We truly put profits in front of people. We put the profits of gun manufacturers, we put the profits of extractors of fossil fuels in front of people, and we put the profits of medicine in front of people. And you guys know more than anybody else, because this is a show that focuses on labor. You understand more than anybody else about how corporations and that put profits before people. So yes, this is an incredibly important point. And what this has shown is America does not care for people. So when they say that they are pro-life, that's not true. You are not pro-life. And you said that you're on a conservative radio station. So if I'm talking to people who are conservative, great. You are not pro-life. You are being fooled. This is not a pro-life thing, right? If you were pro-life, guns would be banned. If you were pro-life, we would figure out what to do in terms of climate change. And if you were truly pro-life, you and your family would all get vaccinated, because the people who are dying are people who are not vaccinated. And the people who are not vaccinated are people who voted for Trump, period.
Right. And that's, the death toll among unvaccinated people is something that is important to emphasize, and it's something that I share occasionally on my Facebook page, because, like I said, I do have most of my family, people that I grew up with, they're all kind of conservative. Most of the people that I've been close with are intelligent enough to have been vaccinated and things like this. But it's worth noting that in the last time that I did this was on November 21st, and at that point, 77% of Alabamians hospitalized with COVID-19 were unvaccinated. 77%, despite them only making up 45% of the population. And unvaccinated folks make up an even higher proportion of COVID-19 deaths. The latest information at that point showed that 90%, 9 out of 10 COVID deaths were among unvaccinated folks. And so, 9 out of 10, it seems to me, 9 out of 10 of these deaths that are happening every day among Alabamians, among people that I live and work and fellowship with, is they're dying needlessly, and that's very sad to me as a person that loves people, loves this community, loves the state, to see so many people dying needlessly. Where can people go? You mentioned that, you've been doing, and I've heard some of your interviews. You mentioned that you've been doing this kind of public health outreach for a year on these vaccines. Where can people go to find some of the more remedial type stuff, like, okay, help get them on board with getting vaccinated? Where would they go if they wanted to see what you were saying then?
Well, I mean, is the easy answer is just, stay away from conservative media and go to any mainstream media. And I am no fan of mainstream media. Mainstream media is just basically the marketing arm of corporate America. Right. But I will say that mainstream media has gotten it right. So stay away from conservative media. But the animations that I was talking about, if you go to noisefiltershow.com, you'll see 2 cartoons. You'll see a bunch of animations, HIV, hepatitis C. But at the very bottom of the scroll, you'll see 2 animations that I created. One explaining how the mRNA vaccine works, and the second one explaining how variants emerge. So if you want to understand how Delta emerges or how Omicron emerges, you'll see that. And like I said, public health science is pretty straightforward. I wrote the scripts for those variants last February. In other words, it was fairly straightforward to predict that variants were going to emerge. So last February, we weren't talking about Alpha. We weren't talking about Delta. We weren't talking about Omicron, right? We were still talking about the variant that emerged out of Wuhan, right? We call that the wild type virus. So the wild type virus is what we were still talking about. But my co-creators, the people who made the cartoons with me, we all were able to predict. We're all public health workers. We were all able to predict that variants were going to emerge. And as a result of that, we wrote the variant script last February, and when I watch it now, almost a year later, I can't believe that how spot on we were a year ago. Right, so noisefiltershow.com is the best place to go. But again, remember, mainstream media is basically the marketing arm of corporate America. So I have no love for mainstream media. I started a radio station here in New Orleans because I have no love for mainstream media. But that being said, they've gotten it right. So stay away from conservative media and focus on anything. Go to the CDC webpage, watch my cartoons. The vaccines are safe. The vaccines are good, and the vaccines will save your life and the life of your family.
And one of the things, I believe it was one of your cartoons that you mentioned, and of course you can see this basically, like you said, everywhere, is that the mRNA vaccines, there's, among people I've heard, there's a hesitance to get vaccinated because, we don't know what's going to happen 5 years out or 10 years out or whatever, a year out or, 2 years out. The mRNA vaccines in your video and in other places, it shows that, like, these vaccines don't stay in your system. You're injected and it does the job of, preparing your body for this disease, and then it's all gone, right?
Right. I mean, there's a social media app called Snapchat. I'm not a big social media person, but I'm aware that there's an app called Snapchat. And the way I understand it is that something pops up, it's there for 20 seconds or whatever time, and then it goes away and it's gone forever, right? That's how Snapchat works. That's how the mRNA works. The actual mRNA is a very unstable protein. It is not meant to be stable for long periods of time, because mRNA, the M for mRNA stands for messenger. And without getting too much biochemistry, your DNA kicks out the mRNA, which then goes to a ribosome, which is kind of like a 3D printer for a cell, and reads those instructions. And once those instructions are read, the mRNA is gone. So you have that mRNA in your system for minutes, maybe an hour, before it all dissipates. So those individuals who are saying, well, I don't know what's going to happen in 5 years, you're the person who's going to likely get COVID and then likely actually develop long COVID, or hopefully not, but you may also risk death as well.
What about this is like a remedial question, but why, because there are people that I know that ask this, why are hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin not appropriate prophylactics or treatment for COVID?
So that's actually a good question, and I like answering that question. All right. So ivermectin is an anti-parasitic medication, and hydroxychloroquine is an anti-parasitic medication. If you had a tricycle, would you put gasoline into it? Gasoline does not go into a tricycle. Okay, like it looks like it's got wheels. It's got a frame. You would put gasoline into a motorcycle. You wouldn't put gasoline into a tricycle, right? So why would you take anti-parasitic medications for an organism that causes an illness that's a virus? You want antivirals, right? You don't want antiparasitics. The antiparasitics completely different than antivirals. Antivirals are actually meant for viruses. So just like it doesn't make sense to put gasoline into a tricycle, it doesn't make sense to fight a virus with antiparasitic medications.
All right, that I think
you
that
can't
makes
get
sense.
more clear than that.
Right. What about people that have natural immunity? There was one person that said that her mother is very anti-vax, and her argument is that she had COVID a couple months ago, and so she shouldn't have to get the vaccine. What is
right? So yeah, it's a good question, and I answer this question all the time as well. So a couple things. One is, when you get the vaccine, you have a standard response in terms of your immune response. We know how much immunity you're going to build. And what has been shown through clinical trials is that when you get the shot, you will build up a level of immunity that will protect you from severity of disease from COVID. Okay. Now, people who are quote unquote naturally immune, they got immunity from being infected. We don't know how much virus they got. Therefore, we don't know how much immunity they have built. So not all immunity is the same. Okay. So the issue here is that we want you to take the shot because we want you to have a standardized response to the vaccine. Now, that being said, it has been pretty clear that if you've had COVID and you've had one dose of the mRNA vaccine, you have the same immune response as somebody like myself who never had COVID, but had 2 vaccines, who had 2 doses. So, and the same thing is if for a booster. So if you were if you got COVID and then got 2 doses of the mRNA vaccine, you have a quote unquote booster immune response. The point is that multiple studies have shown that if you rely on natural immunity, and are not vaccinated, the likelihood for you to get reinfected and possibly suffer the consequences, specifically mortality, is quite high.
Is higher. Thanks for that, Dr. Dery. We're going to go off on WVNN. We'll be right back next week.
WVNN FM Trinity, a Cumulus media station.
All right, let's go ahead and turn WVNN off. We're going to go ahead and go. Dr. Dery, do you have a little bit more time, like a 10?
Oh yeah, no.
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay, awesome. So we're going to go into overtime for the first time ever. We're going to stay online. We've gone off the air on WVNN. I had some other questions from folks that I wanted to ask you as well that are maybe a little bit more advanced, let's say, for people that, normal folks that are like, oh, yeah, I've gotten the vaccine, but I just have a couple questions. So.
Hey, Jacob, before you dive into that, if you don't mind, I'd just like to kind of respond to something the good doctor said that I think really resonates. If I go back a little bit, you mentioned about what it shows about our culture in the United States, and the fact that we have had the worst response by any objective kind of measurement, whatever lens you want to view it through, whether it's a public health lens, a worker lens. There's really no dispute that the United States has totally botched this. Just a few days ago, I was listening to, what's the NPR econ? Marketplace. And they were talking about some of the fallout from the pandemic here as compared to Europe. And just as like a throwaway line, it was mentioned how, believe it or not, in most European countries, workers' salaries were subsidized throughout the entirety of the shutdown, quote unquote. And that's something that I think it's hard to undo what has been done. And this entire pandemic response was you could argue, sabotaged from the beginning by pitting so many people again. You're pitting people's interest as an individual, but also as a member of a community where our health is all tied together. And you're pitting that health interest versus your interest to simply survive in a market economy. And so, I think that really goes to the root of so many of the issues we're dealing with still now in 2021, about to be 2022, is that nearly 2 years ago, you basically forced folks, in many cases, to jeopardize their health in order to maintain their rent, their insurance, their groceries, and vice versa. You had people who were scared enough of their health that they were willing to leave their jobs, and we've seen that in record numbers. But the truth is, none of that had to happen. Those were all deliberate policy choices in the United States of America, the wealthiest economy on Earth in the history of this planet. It's not, I don't think it's that radical of an idea that we could have clearly subsidized workers' paychecks to get us through the worst of this pandemic. And had there been that sort of large-scale response, the sort of large-scale response that we saw our government provide during World War II, we know it's possible because we've done it before. That could have been such a game changer. And I just wonder what our statistics would look like now, all this time later, had we done this thing even half-assed the right way, in February and March of 2020. And I don't know if there's anything for you to respond to there, but I just had to get that off my chest because I think it was so, I really resonated, and I'm glad you really hammered that home.
Yeah, no, I mean, why are we the wealthiest nation in the world or the history of this world? Is because we continually and consistently F over labor and workers in this country. Where did that wealth? And the rest of the world. Where did that wealth accumulation come from? It doesn't, we can't even think about what's going on right now. Listen, I am not a Democrat any way, shape, or form. I identify as a socialist. I'm a very open socialist. Okay, let's be very clear about this. But look at the Democratic Party right now in DC. There is a Voting Rights Act that's on the table. They need 51 votes to pass this, and they need to eliminate the filibuster. The politics of today are such that they can't even they can't even do the things that will prevent their demise. If that Voting Rights Act is not passed, we know what's going to happen. You live in a conservative state. I live in a conservative state. We are going to see more voting restriction laws come down the line, more and more. And we still have Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin, who are opposing the filibuster reform for this Voting Rights Act. We can't do, you really expect that corporate America is going to respond to labor? No, not a chance in the world. They accumulated that wealth for a reason, right? They were able. My brother lives in Germany, and he tells me what it's like being a worker in Germany, right? He's a graphic artist and he's a musician in Germany. And he tells me about what his life is like there, right? And so, no, the politics of today is completely paralyzed. You can't even get Democrats to even do the right thing that will continue to keep them in office. You said
their own self-preservation. Cannot even be fulfilled in opposition to
100%. Right. So when you say, look at how the voters are dying, right? They're killing off their voters, right? Republicans are basically killing off their voters, right? That doesn't seem smart at all. But when you look at the Democratic Party, they're not even able to preserve, if you and I were in office, we'd be running to get that Voting Rights Act in place so that we would continue to actually be in office. Complete self-preservation, but they can't even do that. And let's just be very clear. President Biden is the worst president ever. Remember what he said? Remember why we were supposed to vote for him? We were supposed to vote for President Biden because he was going to get Republicans to vote with him. Remember when he said, I'm going to get Republicans to vote with me? He can't even get Democrats to vote with him. Okay. So no, this is all.
It's a good thing that the primary voters chose to be so realistic. Right. And be pragmatic and go with Joe Biden. Those of us who were supporting Bernie were just pie in the sky and, nothing was going to get done. And I sit here a year later wondering just what the hell has been, what's been done? What has been done? Because I'm seeing very little. And, the paralysis in D.C. has not changed a bit, as far as I can tell, even with, our right-wing Democrat president, even with the Democratic Party controlling both chambers. There's no movement. And for me,
and look what passed. Look what passed. What passed was the corporate-dominated Build Back Better, right? The 1.5 trillion. Right. The hard infrastructure which was basically a giveaway to corporate America. Look what didn't pass, right? What didn't pass was the so-called soft infrastructure, which was going to help you and I. That was going to make
soft,
our
they mean
lives
human
better.
beings, right? I mean,
Yes.
I think we need to be clear about that. And I can speak, for my family and what we are facing, and it's what millions of other families are facing, which is on December 15th, we received our last deposit for having a child. I got $250 put in my bank account, and that is the last time that's going to happen. And barring some monumental shift in D.C., which looks, less and less likely every day we go, and at the same time, I have to prepare for my student loan payments to resume next month. So that's a pretty big swing for me, but it's not even, dropping the bucket compared to what many families are facing, where, you have perhaps $500 deposit being cut off, and now looking at, a $400 or $500 monthly student loan bill, and looking at about $1,000 swing in your budget. That's huge. Right as this Omicron variant is about to really kick some ass based on what you've been describing, because I think, as you pointed out, that it's not necessarily right now that we're going to see how bad it is. It's going to be a month from now, after everyone's congregated, after it's really, really spread. And, I think any sort of, major shutdowns, quote unquote, like we experienced back in the early days, I find that highly unlikely, because they've pretty much proven they don't give a shit. And there's no amount of death that's really going to stop them from closing the Walmarts and the ball games. But that's just going to be quite a crisis in our across our economy and across our society, to have a resurgent pandemic right at the time that people's vital lifelines for families are being cut off. And now you're adding in those student loans. Sally Mae's calling you back. She's a scorned lover, and she hadn't forgot about you, and she will be calling you come February, wanting her money back. It's just a perfect storm.
Yeah, no, and it's such a good point too. If you think about it, those payments lifted half, it relieved poverty in 50%
cut childhood
Americans.
Poverty in half. Yeah,
it cut. Now that begs two questions. One is, well, if that cut poverty in half, then we can cut poverty 100%. Right. Like, we can do it. And then two, why are you reversing it? Because you're going to push people back in poverty. And remember, it's because they don't care. The elite in this country do not care about us. And let's be very, very clear about it. They have shown it. Climate change, gun violence, coronavirus, they do not care for ordinary workers like us. And remember, fighting with Biden and driving with Biden and all that stuff. And Biden's a Scranton guy and he's a union guy, whatever. Where's the PRO Act? Let's go. It was just it was same thing with Obama. I'm going to put on a pair of comfortable walking shoes and hit the picket lines. Right. And we never saw those comfortable walking shoes, and we never saw him out on a picket line. Right. So where are the elites do not care for us, and they do not care for labor. But I will say this, I am somewhat slightly inspired and feel, I'm terribly inspired, but I feel slightly optimistic with the strikes that we're seeing right now, and that we're seeing labor really rise up. I mean, obviously what happened with Kellogg was devastating, right? But I am inspired with what labor is doing right now, and what with the so-called Great Resignation. And so hopefully people will start to realize that we have one thing to fight against the elites. And that is, if we coalesce and we withhold our labor, That is our strength. This is why they crush unions. This is why they don't want unions to be around. This is why they constantly are embattling us. Vaccines, abortions, climate change, whatever we can do to help split people, they will do, because they don't want us to coalesce. Because when we coalesce, we will always beat the elites. We will always beat corporate America. So we have to find ways, but we are deeply, deeply, deeply divided at this point. And if we can't even agree on wearing masks, and if we can't agree on vaccines, I strongly fear for what the future of this country looks like, because they have guns, and they have a lot of guns, and they have a lot of ammunition. And we are starting to see people like Gosart and Boebert and Cawthorn and all of these crazies are starting to call for quote unquote Second Amendment solutions. And you know what that is. Like, that's just code for go out and start shooting the liberals.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, and Rittenhouse is being, I mean, he's being turned into a hero. I mean, oh my God. But anyway, we're gonna
such a good point.
Sorry to get us off track on the big picture, Jacob, but I do know we have a couple specific COVID vaccine questions.
There was a good transition there from the masks and the vaccines to the next question. So I'll tell you my plans, and you can tell me how much you're judging me. So I'm planning on going to a concert tonight in Birmingham that is going to be indoors, but if there is a vaccine,
I'm going to judge you on who you're going to go see.
I'm going to see Lee Baines. Lee Baines and the Glory Fires. So he's good. Yeah. Going to see Lee Baines and the Glory Fires, but you do have to be vaccinated to get in the door. And I don't know if masks are mandatory. I'll probably not, because there's a vaccine mandate. Like, what are as an infectious disease specialist? Like, what is your opinion on? Yeah.
Right, and I'm a musician as well. So I've been playing. So I've been. I live in New Orleans. I gig regularly. I think, and last night, my wife works for City Hall. We went to a mayor's Christmas party. That's probably the last time I'm going to get into a room of people. Everybody had to be vaccinated to get in. Masking was optional. Last night was probably the last time I'm going to probably go into a group of people until Omicron passes. So if you wanted to go out tonight and do a concert, that's great. We canceled any gigs at bars moving forward, although vaccines are required, and they're really good with checking vaccine status before entering a bar here in New Orleans. But we've canceled, and we haven't booked any shows for the next 6 weeks. The band, they're like, oh, well, we have an infectious diseases expert with us. Let's check with him and see what he says. And when I say, we're all a bunch of, 50-year-old middle-aged dudes, with hypertension and slightly overweight and all that stuff. So we're all, and even though we're all boosted, we're very, very cognizant. So I would, my wife and I usually travel for the holidays. We canceled all our plans. We're not traveling. Like I said, last night was probably the last time I'm going to step into a room with people. We don't go to restaurants. We don't go to bars. And again, I've stopped playing any gigs right now until after Omicron passes. Omicron is going to burn very, very brightly. And it's going to probably, kind of like Delta, live fast, die young. So I would get in your last pre-COVID, days, do whatever it is that you need to do, and then start kind of getting back into a 2020, 2021 mentality.
So you think New Year's Eve is probably, you would be hesitant to have a good time or go out and party on New Year's Eve?
I would experience New Year's Eve outdoors.
Okay.
We're not going to do anything indoors with large groups of people moving forward.
Okay. What about the Omicron specifically? There's I haven't looked too much into it, but I have read that Omicron is potentially less deadly than Delta or Alpha or wild type. What's the truth value of that claim?
So There was a great study that just came out a couple days ago that helps explain why Omicron is less virulent. The word that you're looking for there is called virulent. So virulence or virulent. Virulent means how severe a disease is. And so what this study out of Hong Kong showed was what they are able to do. This research group is very famous for testing new pathogens against human tissue. So what they did is they took human tissue from the bronchi. So that's the top part of your lung. So when you take the first breath, when you breathe, it goes right into the bronchi, and then the bronchi splits and before it gets into the lungs. So the bronchi it's the long tube before it gets into the lungs. When they looked at tissue with bronchial tissue versus deep lung tissue, what they found was that the virus was, as I mentioned earlier, 70 times more active in bronchial tissue than Delta, right? So what this explains is why it's so infectious. But the second thing that they found was that it is actually the ability for it to grow in deep lung tissue is actually retarded. It's actually not, it does not grow well in deep lung tissue. So this helps to explain why clinically what we're seeing is that the virus is incredibly infectious, but very likely less virulent. So we are seeing, thankfully, because if this virus was highly infectious and highly deadly like Delta, oh boy, I don't think that listen, I work in hospitals. We're tired. This has been 2 years. We're tired. We're tired and we're frustrated. We're frustrated because everybody that we see, right, is every time I see somebody, they're unvaccinated for COVID and they're in the COVID units or in the ICU, right? It's always one of two things. I'm not anti-vax. I'm like, why didn't you get vaccinated then? I was just waiting. Okay, well, now here you are. And then they're always going to ask you this. Well, can I get vaccinated now? No, it doesn't work like that. You have COVID. Like the whole point is to prevent actually getting COVID. So we're very, very, very tired. Doctors are frustrated. Nurses are frustrated. And this is what you're seeing. So fortunately, what we are seeing, and now I'm going to speculate, if you don't mind me, give me a minute and let me kind of explain what the COVID landscape is like right now. So in 1918, we had the influenza. I'm sure you've all are well aware of that. Now we, 200 and some odd years later, are still living in a post-influenza 1918 influenza era. The virus from 1918 still circulates today. And if you get a flu shot every year, that flu shot that you're getting has 1918 virus in it. So we're still living in post-1918 pandemic flu. We don't know it. You don't see it. People like me will be the ones that tell you about it. But what happened was that over time, generation after generation after generation. So we're talking, I'm going to define a generation for 20 years, generation after generation after generation, that virus becomes less virulent, but it's still going to stay. Now, what we've seen with coronavirus is that each variant has become more infectious and more virulent. Now, we haven't seen that before. Usually viruses become more infectious or they become more virulent, but they never become more infectious and more virulent. This is the first time that we've ever seen a virus become more infectious and more virulent. And I hope, this is me speculating, me crossing my fingers, crossing my toes, that I think what we're going to start to see is that Omicron is going to start the beginning of the virus becoming more infectious and less virulent. And what the virus is ultimately going to evolve into is learning how to live with humans without killing the host. So possibly what we're going to see is that this virus is going to eventually settle down we're going to have coronavirus for the rest of our lives, right? And the lives of our generation after generation after generation, but it'll be more like the common cold. It'll be more like influenza. And that's what I'm hoping. Now, this is our first virus, like our first variant that's less virulent. So we need to wait for 2 or 3 more before we can definitively make those statements. But I do believe, and I'm hopeful that we will move into a period where we will see less virulence with this virus as it evolves into a human host.
Do you think that as the case rates increase for Omicron, that we will actually see death rates decrease when compared to similar? No. You think that it's less virulent, but it's still virulent enough that okay.
Yes. Because because of the math, because you're going to knock off more people, because you're seeing such high levels of infectiousness, you're going to see increases in mortality, but you're going to see less severity of disease overall. So if you look at, I check the New York Times every morning, and I look at their maps and their graphs. We are seeing increases in both mortality and hospitalizations right now. Now, I don't know if that's Delta or Omicron. I think it's probably still Delta, but we will see something shift when Omicron really hits the U.S. heavy duty. But I think that overall, there is going to be less virulence. Now, remember, who is Omicron going to affect? It's going to affect those that are most are unvaccinated. It's going to hit those people who had COVID in the past and are unvaccinated, because reinfection with Omicron is almost certainly a thing. Cornell University this week shut down almost 900 cases of students, and they were all fully vaccinated. Wow. They had 900 cases. So we're going to see those people who are at highest risk: elderly, obesity, pregnant women, that sort of stuff.
So that's a good, the next question that we had came from Ben. Actually, he's he's the owner of Spice Radio here, and he was wondering, since we don't currently have, the vaccine numbers that we need, what will the unvaccinated population eventually diminish from death and sickness, or are we going to be having a huge wave of cases among the unvaccinated every single year?
Yeah, so it's a really, really good question. And let me first say that nobody has an answer, because you're asking me to predict the future.
Right.
So, but I've been sitting here predicting the future, so it's a fair question to ask, right? That one I don't know, except to say that I think yes. I think yes. We will see. There's a lot of human wood left to burn, and that human wood are those people who are unvaccinated or vaccinated but not yet boosted. So if you are unvaccinated, completely unvaccinated, you have the likelihood of you getting Omicron is incredibly high. The likelihood of you going on to get long COVID is incredibly high. And the likelihood, especially if you fall into the category of being obese, of having chronic health conditions, of being elderly, we're defining elderly over the age of 65. If you fall into any of those categories, the likelihood of severity disease is very, very high. And what we will see moving forward, and and I think that the owner of the radio station asked a great question: will we continue to see COVID to be a pandemic of those that are unvaccinated? Without question, the answer is absolutely yes.
Can I say something there? Obviously, not being an epidemiologist like yourself, but my wheels are turning, and I'm thinking, okay, if we have this large chunk of the population here domestically that's unvaccinated primarily by choice, not entirely. Of course, abroad, we have entire regions that are largely unvaccinated primarily due to access. And, this is a broader issue of imperialism and intellectual copyrights, etc. But my point being, okay, so we've got this chunk of folks here and there, they're unvaccinated, and it's going to be able to spread much more through them. It's going to take much more of them down, obviously. But what I'm wondering, and what it looks like to me, is that the more there's that group in which the virus can incubate and then create new variants, is that something that we have to be concerned about, that as long as there's this rump of the population basically that is sort of opening themselves up to coronavirus, that the danger is maybe the next Omicron is just as infectious but much more deadly, perhaps. Does that make sense? Because I'm not a science person. I don't really know exactly what I'm talking about.
You're asking the 100% perfect question. So this is something that I get on my soapbox and yell about all the time, is that we have not allowed this vaccine to be distributed and manufactured around the world. Who created this vaccine? The U.S. government. Who paid for that? Our taxes.
Right.
But it is a classic American move, because remember, the business of America is business. And so if at any time the American government can hand over things to corporate America and hurt itself in the process, they will do that, right? That's what we do. Like, for example, Medicare Part D is basically allows for big pharma to charge anything it wants to the American government, and they cannot, by law, negotiate prices. That was part of what Build Back Better was to help negotiate prices, and we can't do it. Right. So what did we do? So the American government basically, the NIH invented what became the Moderna vaccine, right? We turned around and gave it to this company, or sold it to the company Moderna. We could have negotiated, here, you can make your first $20 billion, but then we will also then at that time release the intellectual property of it and allow other countries to continue, to use the vaccine. But we did not do that. So what's going to happen? There's no question in my mind. I thought of it, and I'm just a humble epidemiologist living in New Orleans, Louisiana, right? There's no question that very, very, very smart scientists that work at the Moderna or Pfizer or what have you, they knew good and well that variants are going to continue to pop off all over the world. They know, and they still withheld it. And this goes back to the overall theme of what we've been talking about, is that we as Americans need to recognize, and we need to wake up, right, from this gaslighting kind of dream that we live in, that we're the best and we're the greatest and that we care for everybody and human rights and social justice and all of this crap, because that's, quite frankly, that's BS. And we know that. We should have been out front vaccinating the globe, right? If we really cared for people, because we know there's a number of studies that show that it's the immunosuppressed who are creating the variants. And this Omicron is thought to have originated from somebody who has HIV, has end-stage HIV that's not treated. I'm an HIV provider. I do HIV medicine. That's my specialty. And the fact that, and I know the immunosuppression you have when you have AIDS, we would refer to that as AIDS. And I know what that immunosuppression is like. And so the fact that we have people who are unvaccinated in this, think about this. And the other thing too, the person who asked the question, is your name Adam? I can't see you.
I'm sorry. I'm behind the scenes today.
No. You said something that I really want to highlight, which is that think about from the perspective of an un-American, right? So let's look at somebody in Africa or somebody in the Middle East or what have you. They can't get vaccinated. Mm-hmm. They don't have access to vaccines. Less than 2% of Africa as a continent has been vaccinated, but yet all the clinical trials happened in Africa. Think about that. And that goes back to the imperialism that you were talking about a moment ago. But imagine the hubris they think about us, when they're like, oh, there's Americans that are not choosing to get vaccinated, and we're desperate to be vaccinated. It is so, the hubris of the American experiment is just beyond. It just leaves me scratching my head, And so if we want to see this pandemic go away, we would vaccinate the globe. We would eliminate this TRIPS waiver. And we would move forward by lifting the intellectual property. During the early 2000s, the so-called aughts, HIV was a devastating disease in Thailand, in India, in Brazil, right? All three of those countries are massive biotech countries. And what those three countries did was just basically take the HIV medications that were coming out of America, and they just, patent or not, they were like, screw it, we're going to make our own generics of it. And you had the various companies that threatened, they sued these countries, but then eventually dialed back because they realized that was a bad look for them. And now you don't hear about HIV in Brazil or in India or in Thailand as we did in the early aughts. You know why? Because those governments actually came up with those generics, and that's how they're managing HIV in those countries. And the same thing needs to happen now. And until it happens, we're going to.
Yeah, well, the same thing needs to happen now. Even like we were talking about earlier, even just the self-preservation, like the system is unable to even self-preserve. Like it would be good
100%.
for us
100%.
if we
100%.
vaccinated the whole world. I mean,
100%.
What about information on the vaccine for children under 6? What's the latest there?
So that I'm an adult doctor, and so I'm not 100% up on pediatric vaccinations. We do know that they're safe, but quite frankly, the one thing I will say is that the Omicron variant has seen an increase in pediatric hospitalizations by 20% in South Africa.
Wow.
So under the age of 18, there has been an increase in 20%. So this virus may disproportionately affect the youngest amongst us. But I am very, very sorry to say that I'm not a pediatric doctor, and I don't focus 100% on peds. I focus a little bit more on the larger and the adult population. So I can't answer with the same level of authenticity that I can with your other questions.
Sure. What about at-home testing for family gatherings? We had one question that
it's a great question. Yep, and we do it ourselves here at the Dery and Elliott household. So. The Bionex test is $23 at a pharmacy. There's 2 tests in them. They're somewhat difficult. You have to kind of read the instructions. Don't just open the box. But those are antigen testing. I think that if you're going to get together for holidays, I think it's a good idea that everybody should be boosted and would take an antigen test, and that they can show that they're negative. I think that if you did that, I think that your holiday gathering would be safe. Even if you weren't boosted, if you were vaccinated, and if you're not vaccinated at all, and I know that we're talking to your audience is in Alabama and is largely a conservative audience. If you're completely unvaccinated, I think that, and you're going to get together with other people for the holidays, New Year's, I think that the Bionex test is sufficient enough to if everybody's negative, that you should feel comfortable gathering in that group environment.
Okay,
it's a great question. I'm glad you asked.
What about mixing and matching for the boosters?
That's a great idea. Mix and match. I got boosted with this. I got Moderna, and then it just happened that I got a third Moderna dose. The studies have shown that whether you mix or match, the level of immunity is the same.
Can I
and including Johnson and Johnson. So if you got a Johnson and Johnson and then you got an mRNA vaccine, either one, I would I would avoid getting a second Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I would recommend that if you got a Johnson & Johnson, only 5% of America got Johnson & Johnson. But if you did get a Johnson & Johnson vaccine, I would recommend getting boosted with an mRNA vaccine, and it doesn't matter which one you get.
Thank you. That was my question. I'm one of the strange 5% that ended up with the J&J, and you never hear discussions publicly about, which shot are you supposed to get? Does it matter which shot you get? So thank you for saying that. You answered my question, and I'm sure I can't be the only one.
Right. I think that was we had one more question. This is the last one. What's the latest information on masking? Is that effective? How should we mask? When should we mask, etc.?
The the science is very, very clear. Here's my phone, guys. I'm going to show you my phone, right? Here's my phone. What were to happen if I were to let go of it, right? It's going to fall to the center of the earth, okay? And a thing called gravity, okay? So masking and the science behind masking is sufficient, and it is clear that masking prevents the transmission of the virus, and it also prevents the acquisition of the virus. When I mask with a surgical mask, and then I usually wear a cloth mask over it. That's just my personal preference. A KN95 is fine. When I travel, so I've had to travel and fly, I usually will triple mask. I'll wear a cloth. I will wear a surgical mask, a KN95 or an N95, and then a cloth mask over it. So I think it's important. Masking is important. I think that we're going to start to see more masking moving forward, especially as Omicron approaches us.
All right. Dr. Dery, I appreciate you being so generous with your time. Thank you very much. I don't have anything else for you, so have a good rest of your Saturday, Dr. Dery, and everybody else.
Yeah, thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
Yep. See y'all next week.
Thank you guys so much.